The results might say otherwise, but Penn State's pass rush is still elite.
You are Locked On Nittany Lions, your daily podcast on the Penn State Nittany Lions. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Is Penn State's pass rush really that bad? Now, concerns are starting to mount on the defensive depth chart, but thank goodness there are some breakout players to maybe bridge the gap a little bit. This is Locked On Nittany Lions. I'm your host, Zach Seyko, and thanks so much for making us your first listen and watch every single day. We are free and available wherever you get your podcasts, including YouTube. Former Penn State defensive lineman Aeneas Hawkins is back. He is the host of The Lions Den, which is a podcast affiliated with State Media where you get to hear the player perspectives from Penn State football players. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Now through September 22nd, all FanDuel customers can bet $5 and you get a 3-week free trial of NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. So Aeneas, we're getting into all of it. I appreciate everyone who leaves a like on this episode, but more importantly, let us know your thoughts down in the comments section. If you have any concerns about the defensive depth chart or defensive setup right now, especially given what happened against Bowling Green, and that's just where we'll start, Aeneas. The pass rush. You're a former defensive lineman, so you know this very well here, so I'm glad we get to talk about this with you. 0 sacks against Bowling Green. But when I look back on it, Bowling Green didn't hold on to the football. There weren't a lot of opportunities to get sacks against the Bowling Green offense.
Yeah, I'd agree with you, Zach. I think on paper, when you look at a Penn State Nittany Lion team with the D-line that we talked about so much in the offseason, you might expect a sack or two at least against a team like Bowling Green just on paper. But again, so much of actually getting home to the quarterback is situational. What is an offense doing? That offensive coordinator, again, deserves a lot of credit for having a good scheme, especially in that first half that had Penn State on their heels. But again, you talk about a 6-year quarterback as well who understands the defensive line that he's playing against, and he knows he better get that ball off in adequate time. So, I understand the panic button on the defensive line and the lack of pass rush, if you will, or lack of getting home to the quarterback even rather and actually finishing the sacks. But I'm still really high on the defensive line unit as a whole.
And I'm glad you are, because I agree. When you look at the two deep depth at defensive end and defensive tackle, so this conversation isn't just relative to Abdul Carter and Denai Dennis Sutton. No, Zane Durant, Devon J. Thomas, that first starting four is elite. And then you go to the two deep, and I know they've kind of been cycling back and forth, whether it's an Alonzo Ford or Akeem Beamon or anything, or Keziah Izzard at that defensive tackle spot. But that's your next wave of interior defensive linemen. And then Smith Vilbert and Amin Vanover are your backups in this group. Those guys could start at a lot of other places.
Yeah, absolutely they could. The depth is still really good. I'll just start at the D tackle spot. I mean, you named 5 guys who I feel comfortable with going into a game really at any time. Alonzo Ford, who obviously was lost last year to injury, he stepped up in a big way. Hakeem Beamon, who is in a more minimal role than maybe you would have anticipated at this point in his career, and is coming off of the bench, still comes off of the bench and does some good things. And again, it's no secret what Devon J. Thomas and Zane Durant are doing. Devon's taken a big step this year, in my opinion, just in terms of consistency in the run game, being seen more on the film. Sometimes he had a tendency to kind of get lost in the sauce and maybe make a splash play here or there, but he's been much more consistent in that run game and has been really stout. And then again, you talk about the defensive ends. We know about Abdul Carter. We know about Denai Dennis Sutton, of course, but you bring up a good point. Smith Vilbert is playing good football, coming off of a 2-year hiatus to come out there and get that sack against West Virginia,
Absolutely.
The strip sack. That was awesome. And then Amin Vanover as well, who has done some good things this season. I guess my thing is there are things to correct still, even in talking about that depth and what you would like that group to be. I still think there's more meat on the bone, and that's really why other people are talking about it and why we're talking about it as well, because when you talk about this 2D, you expect it to be dominant and dominant consistently, and it hasn't been that yet, but it's still the very beginning of the season. I think they have the time to get to that next level we all anticipated.
Well, Abdul Carter has certainly fallen short of expectations here, and I've tried to remind listeners and viewers that, hey, he's moving from linebacker, a position he's played for a majority of his football career, to defensive end, and there's traits that are similar. There's skill sets that he's had to possess as that stand-up off-ball linebacker. to go and play and why they can make a move like this, an investment in this to move him to defensive end. But if you look at the analytics, I like to bring up Pro Football Focus a lot because I think it tells the other side of the story that the box score won't necessarily tell you. The defensive line is not bad. The analytics say that. However, if you look at Abdul Carter specifically, he's actually right now the lowest rated Penn State defensive player according to PFF. Aeneas, how do you react to that? I'm not overly concerned because it is a position change. I think his better football for him is around week 6, week 7, week 8 in the heart of the schedule. But when you see Abdul Carter's the lowest rated player on Penn State's defense, that can't be right.
Yeah, well, first of all, it's a testament to Penn State's D-line. Denied Dennis Sutton, Zane Durant, again, that group that you talk about, those are legitimate football guys that may have a chance to go play in the NFL one day. At least a couple of them will play in the NFL, and a couple others will get some decent shots to go do it, no doubt. So, number one, it's a testament to high-level football being played around Abdul Carter. But, again, Zach, you're on the money. Abdul is just now getting to play defensive end. And I know he's a freak athlete, and we all know that when he's at his best, he's a dominant football force, and we know what he is on the defense, rather. But this is such a skilled position. And again, it's hard as the viewer, and maybe if you don't understand or haven't experienced it, there is so much skill that goes into being a consistently good pass rusher, like the likes of Micah Parsons, like we saw from the Yetur Gross-Matos of the world here at Penn State. And there's just a skill gap that Abdul Carter is working on closing. He does a lot of good things. His fastball is literally his speed. I'm not trying to be ironic there. The way he gets off the edge is impressive, but then continuing to develop moves and counter moves and having that changeup and being able to play a little bit of chess with tackles at this level, it takes time to get there. And I don't think that's a knock on Abdul Carter. He's playing hard. He still is finding ways to be disruptive. It's not like he's been completely canceled out of making impact plays on that side of the football, because that's not the case. I think he just needs to continue to sharpen his skill set and become more polished. There was a specific play against Bowling Green last week where I watched him fire off of the ball and that tackle sprints out of there to try to go kick out and get to him. Then Abdul spins in. And while it's a good idea, he ends up getting hammered by the guard that's sitting there waiting on him. So he's learning these things live action here. He's learning as well. And like you said, this is good to put him in these situations where maybe he is the lowest rated right now, but come week 6, 7, 8, come playoff time, Abdul Carter is going to be firing on all cylinders. And that'll be another added element to the defense that'll come with time.
Right, he is so good at his core that he'll be able to improve. This version of Abdul Carter after week 2 is not the same version that you're going to get when it matters most around week 11, week 12. No, you're not going to have to wait that long to see the best version of Abdul Carter. I think that happens around that midpoint of the season. However, when he needs to be playing his best football is at the most important, crucial time of the season. And despite all that, and whether that's Abdul Carter's lack of results, if you will, or the analytical rating, he's also seeing a lot of attention. He's seeing a lot of double teams. So offenses are accounting for him, and that's why it's opened up playmaking ability for Zane Durant and Dennis Sutton, the linebackers in addition. But now I bring the linebackers into the conversation, Aeneas. There are people that are clamoring for Abdul Carter to go back to linebacker, whether that's a lack of performance or, more importantly, the lack of depth at linebacker. It's why Penn State's moved to the 4-2-5. Aeneas, I don't see it. I don't think it should happen. I don't want it to happen. I don't think Penn State wants it to happen either. I think they are fully invested in having Abdul Carter at defensive end, and they're keeping the 4-2-5, and we'll talk about this more in the second segment, but if Penn State moves Abdul Carter back to linebacker, that is actually the worst case scenario. That means something has gone terribly wrong.
Yeah, it certainly could mean that, and I agree with you. I think Abdul Carter's best football, both now and in the long term, may be up front in that defensive end spot. But at the same time, I would challenge your thinking just a little bit and say that it's not a terrible thing to have a guy who can do both. And a guy that if you want to put him in the linebacker spot, depending on what you're seeing on film and situationally, it's not a bad thing at all. And again, if I'm James Franklin and I'm playing against Bowling Green and Kent State, I personally would put Abdul Carter at both spots and make him do both of them and put as much on film as possible for other teams
to
deal
10 guys
with.
On
when they look at number 11. I think that's a good thing. But again, I agree. I know that I feel like the linebackers have played pretty well. I know depth is a conversation. We'll get into more of that later, like you said. But I think Abdul Carter at either spot is dangerous. But I say keep him at defensive end for the most part. Allow him to continue to develop and get better. Because if my thinking is right and our thinking is right, Zach, in clutch time when the season is really important and there are important games that are happening, Abdul Carter should be playing his best football, and these struggles now are going to allow him to do that soon.
And I do want to clarify, I'm not saying that versatility is a bad thing. So I understand what you're hearing from me. I'm saying that if Penn State is in a position where they force him to move back to linebacker, that means something has gone wrong with the linebacker depth, because I don't think Penn State has any intentions to do that as their plan A, if you will. So let's talk about that, because Penn State could get into a position where the defensive depth chart, fortunately, they're at the bye week. Kent State is on the horizon, but the defensive depth chart, it is not in good shape, and we'll talk about that more on the other side of this break. And today's episode is brought to you by Factor Meals. Factor Meals are great. From convenience to no mess to being able to meet your wellness goals, it's why you choose Factor Meals. To start off, you have variety, so you're not going to get tired of the same old meals every single day. You have 35 different meals to choose from, 60 add-ons as well, so you'll always have new flavors to explore. You can crush your wellness goals. They are dietitian-approved meals that have ingredients that you can trust, so you'll make your day delicious. Breakfast, lunch, dinner, dessert. You'll stay fueled with easy, nutritious options from Factor. Treat yourself to restaurant quality meals that feature premium ingredients like filet mignon, shrimp, and blackened salmon. All you got to do is head over to factormeals.com/LockedOnCollege50 and use code LockedOnCollege50, and you'll get 50% off your first box plus 20% off your next month. How about that kind of deal? That's code LockedOnCollege50 at factormeals.com/LockedOnCollege50 to get 50% off your first box plus 20% off your next month while your subscription is active. Today's episode is also brought to you by FanDuel. You've heard us talk a lot about FanDuel, and that's because it's America's #1 sportsbook. Well, we have something a little bit different for you. Now through September 22nd, all FanDuel customers can bet just $5. $5 is all it takes, and you'll get a 3-week free trial of NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. Then with a YouTube TV base plan, you'll be able to watch every regular season Sunday afternoon out-of-market game, and all you need is a Google account and a current form of payment, and you can cancel at any time, so there's no obligation. Just visit FanDuel.com and download America's #1 sportsbook. And if you look over at FanDuel.com, there are no lines for Penn State versus Kent State just yet. We'll talk about those when they're released. But as far as other local football teams go, you can bet on the Steelers and the Eagles. The Steelers take on the Broncos on the road. The Steelers are -3 on the spread. -156 on the money line with the total set at 36.5. The Eagles host the Falcons. They are -6.5 favorites. Philadelphia is a favorite. They are -320 on the money line with an over-under set at 47.5. If you like those lines, you can bet all of them right now over at FanDuel.com. Again, that's FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. The defensive depth chart specifically, and Andrew Rapplier will be in this conversation as well. Fortunately, there are a lot of tight ends, and that tight end room was as deep as it was going into the season. But there were concerns about linebacker depth. To an extent, I think defensive end depth as well, which is why Abdul Carter made that position change. And then safety, now that KJ Winston is dealing with what we presume to be bumps and bruises, James Franklin won't confirm if it's an injury, what it is that he's dealing with, but he left the game against Bowling Green, did not return, and he was not at practice. Tamir Robinson is not at practice. He's one of those 5 linebackers that Penn State really has right now to work with, and it's just a lot of unproven depth, and truly because they are not playing in these games, and now that conversation extends to safety. KJ Winston is so valuable to this team. I'd put him in if you tried to tier the defense, rank them into groups, it's Abdul Carter and KJ Winston as far as the most talented and most valuable on the defense. And then, I could go through all 11 starters and some other key depth pieces, but they are at the top. They are at the top of the list here. Now, what I'm getting at, when you lose a player like Winston, who is a safety, but really essentially that third linebacker, that's really what he is. He's that third linebacker. And if he has to miss an extended period of time, when you run 3 safety sets, the next player up is Dejon Lane, and I'm optimistic for his future, but can he play right now? Penn State doesn't seem to trust him that much because they've only played him for 3 defensive snaps. So, Aeneas, what are you anticipating if KJ Winston did happen to miss an extended period of time?
Well, yeah, I think you nailed the nail on the head there. It's important to have a guy like KJ Winston out there, not only because he is potentially a first round pick and very well maybe the best defensive player on their team, but again, the depth question is a big deal. I feel really comfortable with Jalen Reed. I feel really comfortable with Zaki Wheatley, despite a rocky start against Bowling Green. He picked it back up and ended the game at a high level, and he's prepared for that opportunity. I feel really good about those two. But again, we talk about what's behind them, and again, those three safety sets and those types of situations. This is where Tom Allen has to understand what pieces he has available, and this is what the great coordinators are able to do. And I would anticipate that maybe until KJ Winston is back, maybe we see less times that three safeties are on the field, and maybe we see a different set of calls on the defensive side of the football, because again, you got to get your best 11 on the field and the 11 you're most comfortable with. And whether or not it's Lane or whether or not he's ready, I don't know. I'm not at practice, and I've only seen him in a few snaps, but I know they're hustling to get him ready in the case that they need him to go out there and make it happen. But just in terms of that third linebacker and bringing a guy down to the box, I do believe that Jalen Reed is another guy that, maybe we don't talk about enough because of KJ Winston. But Jalen Reed is Lamont Wade times 10. He's physical. He's Lamont Wade with more size. And I think, again, those guys that are sitting behind KJ Winston and maybe are watching them have a lot of advancements that maybe some of those old safeties that I played with didn't have, just in terms of having played with guys like Jaquan Brisker and Jair Brown, and what Anthony Poindexter has done in terms of culturally in that safety room. I've got no doubt that they figure it out, but you bring up a good point, Zach. And the season is longer now. Realistically, if you are going to go be a playoff team and make a run at it, there are more games that have to be played. There are more reps to go around. There's going to continue to be more injuries throughout the season as coaches and players both adjust to a longer season. That's just the reality of it. But I do believe that they're going to be okay. And I hope that KJ Winston is just a couple bumps and bruises here, and that the bye week is enough to get him back on the field, because that is a piece that you do not want to lose at this point during the year.
You can afford to miss him against Kent State. And Aeneas, I've already said this already, but Penn State had a scare against a MAC team. That is a good Bowling Green team for what it's worth.
Good Bowling Green team. Yep.
Kent State is bottom 5 in the country, no matter what you look at. Power rankings, analytics, it doesn't matter. Kent State is a bottom 5 team. You can win without KJ Winston, but the game that does matter, Illinois, UCLA, those teams are capable of being able to take advantage of matchups if KJ Winston isn't on the football field. So let's get a better look at that. Because you mentioned that, okay, 3 linebacker sets, Zaki Wheatley and Jalen Reed have played a lot of great football, and they've combined for 247 snaps. They are out there all the time.
Yep.
And so that's why I hope that they're able to handle it. I hope that they have the stamina. It's not even talking about injury designations at this. Can you continue to play 99% of snaps and be out there every single play defensively? And then that's where Tamir Robinson is important, because the top 5 linebackers that are available to Penn State, it's kind of the same thing. We mentioned Dejon Lane. Well, what about linebacker? Kari Jackson, Anthony Specka, are they ready to play defensive snaps if they're called upon? Does Penn State consider just running Jalen Reed and Zaki Wheatley at safety, and then potentially bringing out 3 of their top 4 available linebackers right now, whether that's Kobe King, Tony Rojas, and Dom DeLuca? That's probably what it's going to look like. Penn State, if KJ Winston's not available, they'll move away from the 4-2-5, have a traditional 2 safety look with Jalen Reed playing the strong safety and Zaki Wheatley being that center fielder at free safety, and then honestly going with the traditional 3 linebacker look, which some Penn State fans might actually like better, because this is linebacker U, right?
No doubt. And listen, you're talking to a Brent Pry guy. I love those 2 safety looks. I love 3 linebackers at Penn State. I don't think there's any harm done if they do end up having to give that look. And again, I hate to continue to play devil's advocate here, but KJ Winston being hurt allows them an opportunity to put something different defensively on film. Again, this season is long, man. And if you remember last year, it felt like towards the end of the season, teams like Ohio State and Michigan and ultimately Ole Miss in that bowl game had enough film on how to beat Penn State football, and they knew what they needed to do to make that happen. It was man coverage across the board. It was put Drew Aller in a situation where he has to push the ball downfield. So my point is, teams all year long are going to try to study and find different ways that they can beat you. If Penn State's throwing a different look defensively on film, that's not a bad thing. Again, just to get back to the point of playing more snaps with KJ Winston being down, that is relevant. And immense value in having guys able to rotate in and keep guys' legs fresh for the entirety of the game. And you do lose a lot of that with KJ Winston being out. I don't wonder if Zaki Wheatley and Jalen Reed can handle it. If they're healthy, they can play the whole game and play at a high level. Like you said, they've played a lot of football already, and they're prepared to do that. It's just, again, you don't, in an ideal situation, want to put them out there for the entire game. But it's going to take what it takes. Maybe against Kent State, you see some more of those guys that we have questions about roll in. That's really the only way that coaches can really find out who's ready to do it or not. It looks great in practice. You might have some guys who are maybe not playing at a high level in practice, but you get them on the field on Saturday, and it's a different version of themselves. And you find out a lot about those kids. So I couldn't love the Kent State placement in the schedule anymore, because it's at a time where, okay, now we got to go find more depth and find out who's ready to play on Saturdays.
The bye week allows you to get healthy, but the Kent State matchup, absolutely. I couldn't agree more that this is a game where it's not consequential. Again, Bowling Green gave you a scare and you needed, but that was a missed opportunity to get those players in, to get the backups in, to see what the true freshmen could do with a little bit of a workload. But now Kent State, because of where they are, and it's like, hey, look at any of the news reports, the preseason polls. Kent State is predicted to finish last in the MAC. So this is a golden opportunity and something that you can't miss. You can't play from behind. You can't allow Kent State to stay in it. You need the offense to go out and score touchdowns right away so that you can start to cycle and play with the lead, because Kent State can't play from behind. The only way they stay in any games is if the deficit's not by that much. So if it's a 21-point score right after the first quarter, that allows you some flexibility to get those players in. And I don't doubt Reed's ability. I don't doubt Wheatley's ability to play the full snaps. But if a situation, again, we didn't expect KJ Winston to leave the game early against Bowling Green. If there's a situation where another key player, a Kobe King, a Dom DeLuca, Tony Rojas, which we'll talk about with breakout players in the final segment, Aeneas, you need somebody else to step up. And out of all the other backups that could potentially cycle in, none of them have to this point at linebacker or at safety.
Yeah, and it's going to be interesting to see, like you said. This is the time of year, Coach Franklin used to talk about it all the time, where and sometimes those early games where you understand that you're probably going to go win the game and win comfortably. I mean, it's like a really crucial time during the year. You do a lot of that evaluation during training camp. There's only so many reps that you can get guys, and so many live situations in the era of football that we're in 2024, where you're not tackling as much, you're not doing as much banging in practice. Some of it's safe for Saturdays now, so couldn't agree more, Zach. Kent State's going to be crucially important for that.
And as promised, let's talk about those breakout players. So I've mentioned Tony Rojas. Zane Durant is currently rated analytically as Penn State's best overall defender. Which other surprise players have stood out this season? Aeneas and I will answer that on the other side of this break. Today's episode is brought to you by LinkedIn Jobs. When you're hiring for your small business, you want to find quality professionals that are right for the role. That's why you have to check out LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn Jobs has the tools to help you find the professionals for your team faster and for free. LinkedIn isn't just a job board. LinkedIn helps you hire professionals that you can't find anywhere else, even those who aren't actively searching for a new job, but they might be open to the perfect role. In a given month, over 70% of LinkedIn users don't visit other leading job sites. So if you're not looking on LinkedIn, you're looking in the wrong place. On LinkedIn, 86% of small businesses get a qualified candidate within 24 hours. So hire professionals like a professional on LinkedIn. And LinkedIn understands that small businesses are wearing tons and tons of hats and might not necessarily have the time to devote to hiring. And that's why LinkedIn is constantly finding ways to make the process easier and more intuitive day in and day out. And that's also why 2.5 million, yes, 2.5 million small businesses use LinkedIn for hiring. Be one of them. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedoncollege. Again, that's linkedin.com/lockedoncollege to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. And today's show is also brought to you by Team Ticker. Team Ticker is the one-of-a-kind sports sign for college sports fans. If you're watching this episode, that right there to my left is a Team Ticker sign. Team Ticker is a 1.5 by 2 foot wall sign featuring the Nittany Lion logo and has a cool retro-looking LED display. Its combination of design and function gives you an entertaining, creative way to display your team pride while providing a unique connection to your favorite team. So whether it's football, men's and women's basketball, baseball, soccer, or softball, Team Ticker has you covered. You'll never miss a game as the high-tech retro display provides a countdown to the next big game, as well as daily updates on the latest team news, stats, schedules, standings, and much more. Team Ticker is the ultimate addition to your Nittany Lions sports collection. And once you hang it on the wall, it's going to be the talk of all your fellow Penn State fans. If you're looking for that one eye-catching item to showcase your team pride or a gift for that special Nittany Lions fan, go to teamticker.com and pick up your Team Ticker sign today. Team Ticker is the one-of-a-kind sports sign. Go to teamticker.com right now and use my promo code LOCKEDON and you'll receive $50 off your Team Ticker purchase. Again, that's teamticker.com, promo code LOCKEDON for $50 off your Team Ticker purchase. Penn State's had plenty of breakout players, and it's the reason why Penn State can be a college football playoff team and maybe even shatter expectations is because you need players like Tony Rojas, Zane Durant to not just be okay to good. They need to be great. They need to be elite, and we've seen that from those guys. As far as I want to give some of the surprise breakout players that I didn't really have circled on the roster to say, hey, I'm anticipating a lot of good football from this guy or that guy. The first one that comes to mind for me as a surprise is Elliot Washington. Elliot Washington is getting a lot of playing time. He had an interception now late in the game, so quote-unquote garbage time against West Virginia, but you're still making a play on the football. You're still in there when West Virginia's keeping most of its starters out there. And Elliot Washington, you go to the practice viewing sessions, he's able to keep toe-to-toe with a guy like Amari Evans, who maybe you consider a breakout player as well. I've said he's the key to unlocking this offense to take a next step out of the wide receiver group. But Elliot Washington has impressed me because I think my expectations for him were just to be kind of a role player, special teams, and he's honestly a trusted corner that could start for Penn State, and it's why James Franklin hasn't committed to saying, hey, this guy and this guy will be our two starters at corner. It's because of players like Elliot Washington who make that conversation a little more difficult.
Yeah, and just to couple up off that, I agree. Elliot Washington has played fantastic football and has certainly exceeded expectations just in terms of what we in the media thought he'd be able to accomplish this season. But again, every year it feels like there are two or three guys who maybe you're not talking about as much as you probably should once you finally get to see the product on the field. And he's a guy that clearly has put a ton of work in and has improved greatly because, again, not only in games, but you mentioned that clip of Amari Evans that's going around right now where he's strapping him up in practice and competing against the big dogs, a receiver for Penn State. That's a great sign. And you need some of that depth at the cornerback position, especially as you get ready to play some of those teams that used to be over there out west as they enter the Big Ten here. And you got to start covering guys down the field a little bit more. And people are going to continue to try to stretch the field on you. Those corners are going to need to be able to rotate in and out. And again, kudos goes to Terry Smith, now the longest tenured coach other than James Franklin on that staff. He does a great job with those corners and preparing them at a high level. I know cornerback specifically was a place I had a ton of questions about just with guys who I didn't know how they were going to develop necessarily, and they've seemed to play at a pretty high level, and that's a credit to Terry Smith.
So Elliot Washington is one of those surprise players. I think Amari Evans to an extent is, because when Julian Fleming transferred in, a majority of people, I don't want to say everybody, because on this show we said Amari Evans is probably going to start, and he is, and that's proven to be the case. Trey Wallace has broken out based on the standard, right? What does a breakout look like? Did you get better compared from last season to this season? And Trey Wallace is now that clear-cut number one wide receiver. Amari Evans is the clear-cut number two. Julian Fleming, Liam Clifford, I know Caden Saunders is dealing with some bumps and bruises, but the only other receiver to truly make an impact in the passing game, and probably could make even more of an impact had it not been for some questionable calls and stuff and a couple drops here and there. But Amari Evans is somebody that Drew Aller trusts. More importantly, Andy Kotelnicki trusts him to be not just a gadget player on gimmick setups and formations, trick plays. No, they actually trust him to go down the field and make a play and make a contested catch.
Yeah, and on that note, Zach, one thing that proved that to me right away was, again, against Bowling Green, Amari had a drop. that wasn't pretty, and it was an important time. And then the very next opportunity they get, they take a deep shot with him, and they go down the field with him. They go right back to him. That tells me that entire staff, Kodal Nicky, to Franklin, to Drew Aller, they all trust him and understand the type of player he can be. So I definitely have him as my breakout player so far on the offensive side of the ball. But two guys that I think we're going to get ready to see one of them break out. I'm not sure which one it'll be. I had the opportunity to talk to my guy Tyler Warren after his big-time performance, and we just talked about the tight end room. And it's important to remind people, Khalil Dinkins is just now kind of working his way back from injury. He's going to be an important part of that offense. But then the young cat, number 85, Luke Reynolds. He's going to get a lot of love too. Tyler Warren, when I asked him about him, was like foaming at the mouth excited about this guy and how good of a player he's going to be. So those are two guys I expect to break out as well. But I have to, Zach, you know me, I got to go up front. A guy we knew was probably going to start this year, Nick Dawkins, is not just starting. He's playing really, really good football. And I've been really excited about Dawk. Other than that little mishap at the beginning of the West Virginia game, he's been really consistent. And it's clear to me that he's kind of developed as we thought that maybe he would into the leader on that offensive line group and has allowed some cohesion. And what we've seen is finally some explosive runs happening again. And I think a big part of that should be attributed to Nick Dawkins as well. So that would probably be my pick for breakout offensive player of the year so far.
You took one of mine as far as one to watch for down the road that right now it's just kind of middle of the pack. The performances are respectable, but they're not good or great by any means, and that is Luke Reynolds. I think kind of like Abdul Carter, better football is ahead of him, and he can be classified as that true breakout player in due time, maybe around a week 6, week 7. I'd also keep an eye on Tyseer Denmark. If we're talking about players that break out later in the season, Denmark is one of them just because right now Penn State only has 2 wide receivers that they're really relying on. I just think that opens up an opportunity. And again, same thing with the viewing sessions. Denmark is standing out time and time again. James Franklin is pulling him aside to not only commend him for his efforts and compliment him, but make sure that he perfects his craft. So Denmark will make a good play and he gets pulled aside. And when the coach is working with you, that's a good thing.
Yeah, that's certainly a good thing. When you get to a point in my career like I was, Zach Seyko, James Franklin only talked to me off of the field at a certain point. There was not much that he needed to tell me while I was practicing because it was already over, Zach. And there was nothing he could do to help me at that point in my career. So, yes, when the coaches are still coaching you, when they're on you constantly to help you continue to get better and get more skilled, they're clearly trying to accelerate Denmark's development here and get him ready to go. That is a great sign of things to come in the future for that guy.
He is Aeneas Hawkins, former Penn State defensive lineman, now the host of the Lions Den, where you get a player perspective from Penn State football players on a podcast affiliated with State Media. You can check it out on YouTube, and the links to Aeneas's platforms and the podcast will be down in the description. Aeneas, thank you so much for the time and the perspective and the insight to these Penn State football players.
Zach, it's always a pleasure. Can't wait to be back on again soon, brother.
Again, thank you so much for checking out this episode of Locked On Nittany Lions and making us your first listen and watch every single day. I'd greatly appreciate it if you left a like on this episode. More importantly, be a part of the conversation. Let me and Aeneas know down in the comments section what you think about Penn State's pass rush, the defensive depth chart, and your surprise breakout players on this Penn State team. If you're not already, become an everydayer. Subscribe to Locked On Nittany Lions on YouTube and wherever you get your podcasts for the latest conversations around your favorite Penn State sports teams. Now, for your second listen and watch, got to check out Locked On College Football with host Spencer McLaughlin as he talks truly everything college football, whether it's NIL related, the transfer portal, conference realignment, now the expanded college football playoff. It is all covered. Weekend recaps plus previews to go into the next slate of college football games. And of course, that's why it's called Locked On College Football, available on YouTube and wherever you get your podcasts. And it's part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.